from Luscious Orange joining us here. And Paulo's going to go on about his personal career journey, and then he's going to talk about Luscious Orange, which is a Winnipeg-based design and digital solution company. So it's quite exciting to have creative companies like this in our province doing super cool things. So Paulo's going to be answering some questions about his company and about what they do here. Paulo is a co-founder of the company, so he's going to be a great resource to answer all of our questions, and he certainly has a lot of information that I know he's going to be sharing with us.
Thanks, Hillary. So hello, everyone. I thought I'd start by just sort of giving you the brief story of how I went from essentially where you are now, early high school, to running my own company here in the city. I was born and raised in Winnipeg, and through most of the time I was in school, I always leaned towards math and sciences, but that's always kind of a misnomer. I never liked biology. I was squeamish. I did not do well in biology. So the notion that, people sort of like go down a natural path and it all just works out, I'm going to probably dismiss that quite a bit. It's not true. People go down weird paths. It's not where you think it takes you. So I went to high school in Daniel McIntyre, public school in the West End. Early on, I got encouraged to join a lot of different groups. And so much of where my particular path comes from doesn't come from directly what I did in school, but all the things I did around school. I was involved in the student council. I was asked to join and participate in, different things, speaking in public. I went to youth parliament. In grade 11, I ran for the high school president and I lost. My first real experience in losing, which is super important to fail and lose a lot. But then they asked me to join the yearbook, which I knew nothing about. The weird thing is I joined the yearbook, which you're wondering, this has nothing to do with programming. And you're right, it doesn't. But what's really interesting is I was asked to run the yearbook. I knew nothing about yearbooks. They sent me to yearbook camp, which yes, exists, and it's super weird. And that's the first time I learned about Photoshop and layout and visual styles, which let you know, if you're going to run a design company and you're going to build websites, that stuff matters, right? And so all the other things I did around school helped me go where I am today. So along the way, I'm eventually going to graduate high school and I have to decide where I'm going to go. And I decided to go into engineering. So I actually went through computer engineering. The thing is, I never actually spoke to a single person in engineering before signing up for a program, which sounds insane. The idea that I would say, I'm going to spend the next 5 years of my life doing this thing. Hopefully I like it. But I never spoke to anyone who actually did the job. And so that's one of the main reasons I'm here. I think it's important for you to talk to people who do this every day so you don't get confused or misled about what the job actually looks like. In particular, in technology and programming today, you can find endless examples of what this job looks like. And I'm going to show you one possibility, right? I don't speak for every software developer out there. I don't speak for every tech company out there. I'm going to tell you how I came about it, what I do, what my life looks like, and how I got there. So continuing on, same thing with being in engineering. I was heavily involved in the student council. I was eventually student council president of engineering. I continued to do things like youth parliament, which is like public speaking in the legislature. All these other things helped me become a well-rounded person. And I can't stress that enough. And notice most of the things I'm talking about, I didn't do a bunch of technologically related hobbies. I did things that made me good at other things other than technology. I was already kind of good at math and good at sciences. Yes, you have to put effort in there, but it's not the only thing you have to do. You're always going to excel the things that you enjoy. The trick is to find the other things that tie into it that make you a better person in general. And I can't stress that enough. Hobbies, side projects, team sports, whatever it is, super important. And continue those as life gets busier. I eventually graduated from computer engineering. Somewhere in the middle there, I was really not enjoying engineering because school isn't always that fun. I'm like, maybe I should go into law. Thankfully, I didn't. I would make a horrible lawyer, but I considered it. Along the way, eventually, so I graduate, and I was fortunate to have supportive parents. And my parents had started their own business in trailer repair on the highway for semi trucks. And so they supported me when I said, I'm going to try to do this on my own. Along the way, I kept on doing a lot of the graphic design work, and I kept on, trying to build websites. And of course, I was in my early 20s. They were bad. Of course they were bad. The first version you make of anything sucks every time. But I made websites. I did design work. I volunteered my design work. I helped out. I contributed. And by the time I graduated, my parents supported me and said, why don't you give it a go? So I got some early contracts. I did some design work for the World Women's Hockey Championship in 2007 when they came to town. And I did development work for a big website for actually a private school here in the city. And that sort of led me down a certain path. The notion that I somehow chose every step of the way and is all calculated, that rarely happens, right? Opportunities come up, you take advantage of them, you let some slide. And so I ended up in a world where I was essentially on my own. I was a solopreneur, as it was. I was doing all the design work, all the meetings, all the programming, everything on my own. I was a one-person shop. And I did that for 10 years. Lots of ups and downs, still volunteered in the middle, still did lots of other things. And for 10 years, it went pretty well. But at some point, I realized only so far that I can go being a one-person shop. Certain size of companies won't hire a one-person team. It's just too risky. So I merged together with my business partner, Mike Fagundes. We'd actually known each other back through our engineering days. We started doing more design work. He was more design focused. I clearly excelled on the programming side. My brain works that way, much easier. So we started doing splitting of duties. We worked on quite a few other projects that came in the door. And eventually we hired another programmer. We hired a content strategist. We hired a designer. And we're a team of 5 people now. And that's sort of the general arc of how that went. Things come up, you deal with them, you spend a lot of time and energy. I definitely invested a lot of time and energy, both doing my work and helping other situations. And I was able to get good at it. And now we're happily running. We work from home all the time. So we were pretty used to it when COVID happened. You're seeing my office. This is my daily office. I've worked from home for the past 15 years. And that's sort of how that all came to be. I will answer Hillary's question about where the name came from. When we merged, we decided to take the best of either side, no matter whose it was. Just like, what's the best for the company? And he had this name called Luscious Orange lying around. And it's actually a scene from the movie called Hackers. It's from the mid-90s. You should watch it. It's not good. It's really not good, but it's fantastic. And there's a scene when all these people are, as you can imagine, in the 90s, trying to like prove their cred that they're super nerdy. And so they bring out the different colored books. And it's like, oh, the big red book that won't fit a shelf. And the guy pulls out a book and says, Luscious Orange. And my partner thought that just sounded great. So in 1999, he bought lusciousorange.com and sat on it for the good part of a decade. And then when we came together 5 years ago, that name was sitting there and we decided to use it. And it's a perfect little fit for us being like kids who grew up idolizing tech in the 90s. And that's what that movie kind of symbolized. So that is generally how I got there. It wasn't a clean trajectory. There's a bunch of times when I definitely said, like, is this what I want to do? Or is this where I want to be? I could have easily ended up being, at this point, a senior developer for a large organization in San Francisco. That's a path that didn't happen. That didn't happen. It's not good. It's not bad. It's just not what happened. So that's the basics of it. Scott, do we have any questions coming in so far, or should I sort of jump some of the topics there?
Yeah, so we have a couple questions. One student asked, do you think that working at different jobs is good for finding out what you actually want to do? And another question, how do you actually get contracts?
Sure. So working at different jobs, I'll admit I don't have much experience in that. I've hired people who've done that. I could say I've had the opposite experience where I've had a whole bunch of contracts. So I've had different clients. So I have a bunch of bosses, essentially, in a way. So working at different jobs is good because it gives you experience in working different teams in different environments. Job hopping is bad because, in particular in software development, I see this a lot where the goal isn't to find a job you enjoy. The goal is to work for a name brand. That's a very odd thing that's only happened in the last 15 years. People don't say, I want a job where I get to do cool stuff. They say, I want to work at Google, or I want to work at Instagram, I want to work wherever. right? And it's a weird metric to put yourself at, because most people would probably want to have a job they enjoy rather than just having a job that is just name brand, right? I know lots of people who've worked at plenty of those companies and they didn't necessarily enjoy it because it wasn't what they wanted. So I actually teach the Intro to Web Development course at the U of W right now. And I had this similar kind of question come up. And what I always tell students is, don't worry about finding the thing you like, because that's really hard. It's really hard to narrow, this is what I'm going to do. What you actually want to focus on, what are the things you hate, right? You take a course and you're just like, ugh, this is torture. That's super valuable information. That's one of the reasons it's there, because learning about something and being like, this seems horrible, I would not want to do this, is fantastic. Because what ends up happening is you're told you have all these possibilities, all these things you want to do, and all these sort of options you have. But in reality, you probably don't want half of them. So being able to like knock some of them out of the way is huge. That's actually more important, because there's a bunch of things you could enjoy. And the reality probably comes down to the specific kind of work, who your team is, what responsibilities you're given, whether or not your job actually matches with your skill set as, and that takes years to refine. So I would say not necessarily working different jobs, but exploring different topics and finding which ones you like and don't like. I would talk about topics, not necessarily work. There's too much of focus on like the job and the work, and there's lots of ways to make money, but only if you actually enjoy it, right? I could have gone and become a doctor. I'm smart enough. I could have made it happen. I would be a horrible doctor. I shouldn't have gone there. But it's nothing to do because of the money. It has to do because I'd be a really bad doctor and I'd hate my life because I don't deal well with surgeries and blood, right? So that's not for me, right? Same thing I mentioned about maybe I should go into law. I would have made a horrible lawyer. The reality of being a lawyer is a lot of paperwork. I don't like paperwork. Okay, good. So that's where I think the importance is. Figure out different things, experiment with different things, whether it be in directly related or just secondary, even like the kind of communication you want to do, whether you like responsibility. A lot of people, oh, I want to start my own business, or I don't want to start my own business. Well, do you like being in charge? And not like oh, I like having all the power, but like, do you like being responsible in the last line of defense for everything? Some people find that very uncomfortable. It stresses them out. Not for you. That's fine. There's plenty of jobs out there. So that's what I'd sort of say on that one. Finding contracts. So we're fortunate. Our contracts come mainly by word of mouth. That's a fortunate thing we can do in Winnipeg. I absolutely love Winnipeg. It's a small knit community. It's a very connected community. And so we will get it by people who know and trust us more than anything else. It's trust. If people don't trust you, you're worthless. Because if I want to hire you and I don't trust you, like, we work from home, it's entirely based on trust. I don't know any given day what my staff is doing. If they're lying to me, I don't know. I have to trust them. And our clients come to us because they trust us. Or, as it's happening more, we do work for someone else. They see that work and they're interested, and they contact us. So we're fortunate in that regard. On occasion, we will apply through something called RFPs, which is when large companies say, hey, we're looking to build a website, and they put it out and it's public and everyone submits a bid. It's not my favorite process. We only do a few of them a year that we even apply to, but that's another way to get contracts in. That's sort of the main two ways, but mainly people trust us and come to us, and we're fortunate to be in that role.
So another question that we have is that it says you've been working at home for 15 or so years. How do you stay productive and not get distracted working from home?
You do get distracted. That's the misnomer, right? That's the lie people do. Oh, I'm super focused at home. Like, no, I get distracted. I'll go and do my dishes. That's just how it goes. The reality of it is, part of that role is you find routines for yourself that works. So you figure out certain things that make sense for you. You start finding different ways that you have patterns that you work well in. So I know I'm a better programmer in the morning. I'm a better writer in the afternoon. If I'm going to write emails or respond or write proposals, that's more of an afternoon thing. The morning, I can really get through a couple hours of good programming. And I set a schedule. I sort of break my day into morning and afternoon. I'm going to accomplish something in the morning and something in the afternoon, 5 days a week, 10 tasks a week, right? That's how I sort of break it down. And people say, well, what about Netflix? I'm like, yeah, there's distractions there. But honestly, everyone has a giant computer attached to their hip all the time. Distractions are everywhere. You don't have to be at home. I'm just more comfortable, right? I've not had to drive to work and be stuck in traffic and all those other things that come with an office. You know, people stopping by and say, "Hey, do you have a minute?" I don't have those things. So productivity looks different at home, but it's also because I'm comfortable with it. I'm okay being alone. I'm a very social person. I found other ways. I would go out with for friends and grab a coffee or interact, or I would, meet friends and interact in that way, or talk with my clients. And now I have my staff I interact with. So there's different ways that happens, but I never felt the urge to like strike up a conversation with the mailman. And the last thing that sort of happens is motivation. And there's a different motivation. So right now, in high school and you're trying to deal with all this, and I can sympathize. That's tough, and I sympathize with your parents because they're not designed to be school teachers. They're trying to, still do their jobs and whatnot. But this is kind of a different scenario because you feel trapped at home, right? I feel more trapped now than I have in 15 years because I can't just go to the store when I want. And so there's an element of that sort of happens that changes in this particular environment. So if you're talking about like working from home or doing schoolwork or anything like that, it sort of changes depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And for me in particular, there's also the matter of motivation. Well, I have to get stuff done. And for me, it's like, well, if I don't do this, I don't pay rent. That's a pretty good motivator. Eventually, you just have to get it done. I did struggle with a lot of procrastination early on. Things fell behind, but also I'm self-employed, so I'll just work until 2 a.m. Bad habit. Got out of that, right? Not healthy, not sustainable. So that's generally how that goes. So distractions are there. It's not like it's some idealistic scenario. There's a trade-off. I get a remarkable amount of freedom with how I run my business and how my company runs their business, and I'm happy with that trade-off.
Another question is, what are the advantages and disadvantages for a company having only 5 people?
Oh man, we don't have a central office. We're not paying rent right now in the middle of a pandemic. That's a huge one. That's a little kitschy, but that's the reality of it. Staying small has quite a few benefits. Number one, I'm not trying to treat my staff as a revolving door. If I had 2,000 employees, I would probably never notice if 1 or 2 of them left. In this case, I know them all. They're all very close to me. We have yet to have an employee leave us. We can put the energy to treat them well. We can give them more responsibility. There's more one-on-one time. We're a close-knit team. We can adapt to things quicker. When we do a project, I know exactly who's going to be doing what. And there's a pattern and a familiarity with that. So the idea of staying lean really works. We also don't need to have a giant, like growth isn't always the right option, right? People are like, oh, you got to grow, you got to go big. Like I've been in a bunch of scenarios where I could have gone out on different side projects and whatnot and got venture capital and, get in, you can find $1 million, $2 of venture capital for an idea and go and try to grow it. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're making more money or that you're happier or that was the right choice or even makes sense, right? There's different stresses with that. Staying lean and small means that, we can adapt to stuff quicker. I can get feedback quicker. There's less HR, there's less overhead, there's less management. Our bills are smaller, right? When you run a company like this, when you run any company, there's what people don't want to talk about and what people don't always get when they're going to start a company is there's the realities of running the business. There's overhead, there's all these other things that come with it. And whether you're doing software development or doing anything in tech, it doesn't matter. You're running a restaurant, there's overhead. Staying small means there's less overhead. That lets me sleep at night a lot easier. So now the trade-off I would say is if you're talking about particular for development, we do a lot of custom web development. It means it's harder for us to scale up, right? So if someone says like, hey, you want to do this thing, do you have 5 developers? No, I don't. And like, we'll just hire more developers. Training a developer takes a long time, right? It takes a lot of energy to train anyone, but developers in particular, because so much of what we do is behind the scenes, you can't really see it. So that's one of those things that sort of comes up a lot. So those are sort of the trade-offs. I would never want a large team. I would never want a giant office. We actually have a rule that if we find ourselves saying, oh, maybe we need office space, we stop and reassess what we're doing. That's one of the thresholds we have internally in our company. So yeah, that's one of the benefits. Yeah.
So you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but one student asked if you plan on making your company larger at any point.
It can happen. I'm a never say never kind of person. I would say there's nothing wrong with getting bigger. I would love if we had one or two more programmers and one or two more designers, but it also becomes more difficult to sustain. Right now, we have 2 or 3 projects on the go, and a few clients that we support and maintain. We don't. If we had twice as much staff, we'd have to have twice as much work coming through, and that becomes much more challenging. So certainly room to grow, but we want to do it in the way that seems natural and right. Every time we've had to hire, like when we started with just 2 of us, every time we've had to hire, we're like, oh, this feels right. And we haven't had any regrets about that. Would we ever be the kind of company to sort of all of a sudden just be like, we're hiring 4 new people at once? I can't see us getting there, nor do you need that to grow, right? The more mouths you got to feed, the harder it is to stay afloat. So it's an option, but it's not the goal. That's what I'd say. It's not the goal. The goal isn't to get bigger. The goal is to do better work and get paid well for it, and pay our staff well for it, and have less headaches.
Sure. And another question, you talked a lot about the fact that you started your own business and that sort of thing. One student asked, would you still enjoy working if you were hired by a company, if you weren't running your own company, you were just an employee of a specific company?
So I would say I would enjoy the work if I was enabled to do the work I enjoy. And that sounds like a loopy answer, but it's not. So whether or not I enjoy my work or not enjoy my work doesn't really depend on if I'm in charge. It depends on whether or not, for me personally, I'm given the capability to do what I'm good at. I'm very good at pattern recognition. I'm very good at planning and sort of seeing the big picture and drilling in to make sure that we're answering and solving the right questions. If I was working for a company that let me do that, I'd enjoy that work for sure. I could be given the exact same role in a company that had a crappy boss that was really overbearing, and I'd hate it. So again, it's not about the size of the company, it's who I work with. I make a much better boss than I do an employee. I don't think I make a very good employee. After 15 years, I'd make a really horrible employee because I would tell them that their ideas are dumb if I thought they were dumb. And if I had a boss who was like, oh, thank you for speaking your mind, I really appreciate your honesty, we'd work great together. That's rare, I'd say.
Another student asks, is it worth the risk to create your own business, or should someone try to find work for an employer?
That is a personal choice. I say there's nothing wrong with experimenting on your own. I think it's really important to do side projects and try different things and work with different people and experiment. That all should happen. Whether or not you pick that as a career choice, that's not an answer for me. Like, if you are not good at managing your own time and doing all the other things that starting a business, like starting a business has a lot of stuff. Like, do you want to get into the nuances of tax code? It's not fun. It's a requirement, right? Being an employee means that you have way less responsibility. You can just do the work. Okay. So assuming that you find a job that you like and you can work for an employer that lets you do good work and you enjoy the work, do it. If you feel like you have the need to create something on your own and take on a challenge and make something out of nothing and lead the way, then try it. But it's not better or bad. It's, does it fit you? And that's what the benefit of being where you are in your lives and your careers and where you want to end up is. You have quite a few years right now where you can experiment and play and try things fairly low risk, right? I could not do what you have the opportunity to do right now. I could not say, meh, well, if I don't make any money for the next 3 weeks or the next 3 months, I can just go build this thing and see what happens and see if I like it or not. I'm not in my point in my career where I can do that. I have staff I have to manage. I have projects I have to manage. I have responsibilities. I'm married. I have a house. In high school, education's still like mostly free. Even if I don't know whether or not, someone, like, regardless, you're not paying for your education right now, right? Most likely. So you have a lot of freedom. You can go and experiment. Most things for high school students are pretty low cost. The older you get, the more expensive it gets. I use the example of gym class. You're required to do exercise right now, and it's free. You have access to a gym. people 10 years older than you pay a significant amount of money per month for that privilege. So now is the time to experiment and figure out if that's where you want to go, because you have a huge support mechanism behind you. Not only do you have parents and classmates, you have teachers, you have all these people who are just trying to help you figure stuff out. Now's the time to experiment. And I knew I was okay going into running my own business because I was already doing a lot of stuff involving leadership. Like I said, the student council, yearbook, all these different things I was doing already led me down the path. I knew I liked being someone to lead a team and help them grow. So for me, it felt like a good fit. But I could have easily gone down a different path and been equally happy. Just didn't happen.
And the last question that I've had come in so far is, how did you fund your company when you first started?
Funding. So here's the thing. Funding is only an issue if you have costs to cover, which sounds weird. But early on, I had a project come in. I quoted that project. The project had some money, and the money was mine, and I'd pay my bills with it. So I didn't quite have a company. I had a job, right? I made a job for myself. I did work. People paid me for work. That money was usually enough, kind of, to pay my bills. Okay. When I was working from home, and once again, I'm going to preface this all with, I have fantastic parents who bought me a computer. They paid for my education. They were very supportive. None of this happens without my parents being amazing, right? And wonderful and caring and supportive. So I had all that going for me. And eventually, they gave me the room to fail. They gave me the room to experiment. And then once that was sort of in place, once I got some work, I got some other work that paid some bills. I spent some money. But when you talk about I have to the question is well, how did you pay for that company? The assumption is that I have an office with a cubicle and a team, but that's not what it was. It was me at my computer, in a desk set up in my living room, where people would ask for work and I'd pay them. People would ask for work and I get paid. So it's somebody doing design work. It's like 3 hours of work here. I charge you. So it's really the funding is only really a big concern to talk about if you're trying to fund something that's above your means. So to be honest, I lived within my means. I have a question. What is the most interesting project you have worked on? Oh, that's a fun one. So interesting is a relative term. I'll talk about some things I've done in the past. So actually, I'll talk about something pretty relevant we did recently. We did the website for the Manitoba High School Sports Athletic Association, MHSAA. So if you play any sports in high school, you've dealt with this organization. This was a fun data problem and a fun layout problem because every coach, every person who runs a team in Manitoba for any sport needs to submit scores. And then rosters, and there's a bunch of approval process, because I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but if you switch schools, there's a bunch of rules about whether or not you can play a particular sport. Stop high schools from just poaching all the best players. A bunch of rules around high school sports. And they had an old website. They actually had 3 old websites. They had their main website. They had a website for their data management. And then they had a separate website for the provincials, for all the provincial championships. All 3 of them, 3 separate, unrelated databases, all on old architecture. And so when we started talking to them and building out this project, it wasn't like, yes, we're building a website, but most platforms you're talking about, you're not just building a website, you're building data infrastructure, you're building a way to manage all this information and a way to present it, right? Collecting data is super easy. Interpreting it and presenting it is challenging. So they had a bunch of data in 3 unrelated databases. So one of the things we actually had to build was a tool to take all 3 streams of data coming from 3 different sources. One was in an Access database, one was in MySQL, one was in something else. And we had to find a way to write a single MySQL script, database script, to merge and compare them all to get to one unified information system going back to 2002. So how did Sally Johnson, who attended Daniel McIntyre in 2012 and played junior varsity in grade 9 in one system, pair up with that same Sally Johnson in another system? How did the junior varsity boys volleyball team for St. Paul's match here with the one here? And we had to build a script that had to compare. And that you may say, oh, that's a fun programming problem. But the thing is, it's a question and answer problem. Writing the script isn't the hard part. Understanding what on earth to do with this information and what the rules are, tough part. So I got to the point where I'm like, I'd be emailing the two guys who I started dealing with, and I'm like, hey guys, I have 24 more questions for you. And it would be, okay, if we're talking about junior varsity boys football and they're like, oh, well, no, actually, the football isn't junior varsity, it's just football. They happen to be categorized one or the other. Okay, that explains why it's that way and this isn't that way in this system. I had to compare every sport and every genre and every type, right? Some of them are co-ed, some of them are not, some of them are split, some of them are, this grade and only this grade. And I had to write a script that accounted for each one of those weird things, then converted the data in each one into a single format that matched what we were building, and then have to build the rest of the website around it and all the tools for them to modify that data and view it and update it and all these other tools around them. So that was a pretty fun project because it was a fun data analysis problem. It was a really interesting design problem. How do you present all this information? It was also a user interaction problem because all these coaches have to submit scores and submit their teams for approval. And we ended up building a whole bunch of tools to catch people who are trying to slip through the cracks. And so we had this long list of things that people would use to try to skirt the system. And so the first year, we had this entire back end area that was just identifying all the things that people had done that were trying to skirt the system that were never caught before. And that was super fun. And it was not a small list. I'm going to talk a bit about what it's like to be a programmer specifically, to type for a living and build code. So some of this will stem from lessons I give to second-year university students who take my course, because at that point, they're still not very good programmers. It takes a long time to become a good programmer. And it's not about skills you have and what you have memorized. It is about habits. So now is the time when you want to break all your bad habits as much as you can. Because you see this one in a million sort of like savant programmer who, is just super great and, can build stuff super fast and builds amazing stuff. They're usually actually pretty crappy employees. The reason being is they don't know how to communicate. They usually are so good at doing things on their own and get everything done by themselves and just go at it and say, well, here's what I did, right? That's great on your own, but that's not great as an employer, because you didn't talk to me about it first. You didn't comment your code. You didn't think through it, ask questions. You just built what you wanted as a one-shot, boom, here we go. That usually is not great code. As I said before, the first version you build of anything sucks. It will be bad. It will not have all the features it needs. It will have bugs. And so the good practices and good habits are what make you a better programmer. So the first one I'm talking about always is commenting your code. I'm not sure how much, Scott, do we learn a lot about commenting code and the importance of commenting code?
We enforce it with all of our projects.
Great. However aggressive Scott is, I'm going to tell you, he's probably not being a big enough jerk about it. I cannot stress enough the importance of being able to communicate what something is doing to someone else. It is a deal breaker. Whenever I do code reviews with my team, half the time it isn't, hey, this isn't quite working. Half the time is, you didn't comment your code, don't even talk to me. Not that rude, of course. I'm like, hey, can you? But the reality is, like, if you don't write down what it's doing and explain it for the future, you have a problem. You're creating a long-term liability for me because you wrote some code. You probably thought it was pretty obvious. And I'll tell you what, no matter how far you are in your career as a programmer, doing it for programming for 20 years, starting in school, 2 years in, 5 years in, doesn't matter. You always think it's obvious because guess what? You just wrote the thing. Of course you think it's obvious. Your brain just worked through the whole problem and you just typed it all out. But it's not obvious, right? Code is not obvious. Yes, even well-written code with good variable names is more easier to interpret. But that just says the how. comments not only give the how, they also give human readable stories that walk someone through what it's doing. Okay. That's the importance. It guides people so they don't have to read the code. You shouldn't have to read all the code. You should have to read the comments to get to the part of the code you need, and then you analyze that section of code. If you don't comment, I need to now read all of your code to figure out what I'm looking for. And that, I don't care how well written it is, sucks. It's not good. The other thing you have to remember is that comments don't just say the how, they say the why. And code doesn't say why. Comments say why. Why are you bothering with this triple nested for loop? What on earth are you doing? Why is it there? That's what comments are for, okay? So when you comment functions and methods, when you comment individual lines, all that stuff is there to provide signposts so a human reading it can get there, okay? And this isn't about language either. I've read comments in multiple languages. I've had to convert them. Even then, comments written in Ukrainian, which I've had to do and put into Google Translate to understand what the code was doing, were still better than the code because the comments tell me why. The last thing I'll say is when it comes to documentation, and this is something you don't encounter much as students, in general, this doesn't happen, which is why I would always encourage you to build a project outside of the school system that you take care of for a long time. Doing a long-term project that you own will teach you more about the importance of commenting and documentation than any school system will. And here's why. When you do schoolwork, you go and you build something and you have a goal and you try to finish it, and then you get assessed and marked based on how well you did. And you probably never come back to it, right? I don't know how often you've opened an assignment you wrote 6 months ago and go read it. The answer is probably never. And so the school system means you're constantly challenging yourself with new things, you move on to the next thing, then you're done with it. Well, guess what? In the professional world, it's actually the opposite. You build something, you've now added to the long-term infrastructure of a company, of a system, of something. And that code is going to stay there forever. And other people are going to read that. Or more importantly, you're going to go back and read it 3-6 months later. And you're going to be, what on earth was I doing? And that lesson of like, ugh, why didn't I comment this better? Well, is where it really hits you. So if it sounds like I'm harping on it, it's because I really, really am. Whenever I mark stuff, I give marks towards comments, and I would say if you don't comment it, I would give zeros if you couldn't comment it, because now you're not trying to be a developer, you're just trying to write some code that does something, right? The other thing I'll add, a weird nuance that happens not just in computer science, but in quite a few different areas in the educational system, just the nature of what it is. When you hand something in, you get marked. That's fine. I've had to mark stuff. Let's say you get 85%, 90%. Like a 90%, like, wow, you did great. And what you have to understand is that is a really good mark in the educational system. The problem is that if you wrote that for me, you got 1 out of 10 things wrong. That is not acceptable. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Okay. And that's the difference. And that's what you have to remember. And when you do a long-term project, that's a lesson that comes through. It's like, oh, this isn't working. You can't just say, well, it didn't quite work. I got close enough. And trust me, I submitted more than my share of those assignments. They happen. But don't conflate that with what the job really looks like. Because in the real world, that wouldn't be good enough. You'd have to come back tomorrow and you'd be late. And you have to fix it and then send it back to your boss. And then they'd look at it again. And if you rush through it, they would point out more mistakes. And then that would probably get run through a systemized series of tests that would say whether or not it meets all the new things, all the new requirements. Maybe your code just broke another thing in the system. Now you're adding more problems. Now you're someone else's headache. That's what it looks like a lot of the time, right? It's usually not the ta-da big moment. It's the little baby steps along the way. So it's kind of like when you do like a jigsaw puzzle. The moment when you're finished it is almost anticlimactic, right? Putting that last piece in, it's so obvious. You're like, oh yeah, there's the last piece. And then maybe you take a picture and you say, well, I did it. That's cool. And then you stop looking at it, right? The joy in doing a jigsaw puzzle is all the little pieces in between, and programming is the exact same way.
So one student just basically asked a clarifying question, asking is it important to take breaks in between writing your code and trying to understand it so you know where to comment and what to comment? Basically, so should you take time doing your work and maybe space it out a little bit longer so that you know a little bit better what needs to be commented?
So great question, but you're asking the wrong question. Because if you're talking about writing the code, then commenting it, you're doing it wrong. And that's the unfortunate fundamental truth. You don't comment after you write it. You comment as you write it. Okay? If I'm gonna go create some function, I'm gonna do something, I'll go like I'm whatever language you're working, function name, curly brackets, maybe a parameter who's gonna go in. I go write the comment block for that at the very top first, because I should be able to say what the point of the function I'm just writing is before I write it. Otherwise, why are you writing it? If you don't know what you're gonna type, at least the premise, right? You just created this new function. If you don't know what it's supposed to do, stop typing. Go back and think more. If you do know what it's going to do, you should be able to write that comment. So do it first, okay? It's not a after the fact thing. And then when you go and write that code, as you're writing, you should be able to say, essentially, go initialize the array. Well, you don't write the code to initialize the array. You say comment, initialize the array, and then you write the array. I have never in 20 years gotten upset with someone for too much comments. It's actually not a thing, okay? And now you say, well, should I comment line by line? I don't know. If you're doing some really weird, obtuse thing, maybe. You don't have the context. You never will have the context for what has to be commented. So you should just explain your code, right? And the best way to think about it is imagine if all the code was removed and only comments remained. Could you read it and would it tell a story that accomplished something? Did it seem like it missed a line somewhere? Is the story missing a gap? Is all of a sudden, we watch a movie and all of a sudden it's gone to daytime when it was nighttime and they're like, whoa, what happened? If your comments have that feel, you missed a step. You did ask a question about taking breaks. And what I would say is, so you don't take your breaks after commenting, right? Because you still won't have the context, so it doesn't matter. Just write it beforehand, write it as you're doing it, comment as you go. What you do take a break from is when you're beating your head against the wall for a problem. Because when you try to assess code, you're in it too much, you're working on it, then it really gets frustrating. And so that's when, despite your best instinct of, I'm just going to push through, I have a deadline, the assignment's due, set an alarm for 15 minutes, get up and walk away from the computer. That is actually super valuable, okay? It'll do two things. Number one, you're not looking at the code properly anymore. We both know it. You're just frustrated. So walking will calm you down. You'll be able to come back. Because you have to reorient yourself in your code, you're going to actually read through your code. It's going to give you a fresh perspective. That will help you identify if comments are missing. You're like, oh, what's this doing again? Even a 15-minute break is enough to reset that. But it'll make you more calm and it'll give you a fresh perspective, and usually you'll solve it better. So literally like setting a timer and not just walking away and coming back still angry, like you were forced to stay away for like 10, 15 minutes. That really does help. And I'd recommend doing that more. And you'd come back to and you would see if your comments aren't done right.
Yeah, I sometimes, when I notice students are struggling with a problem, I'll actually take their keyboard away from them and say, you just need to take a break, like step away from the computer, go take a walk for like 10 minutes and then come back and I'll give you your keyboard back. But until then, you're not getting your keyboard, so you're not going to be able to touch this.
Oh, yeah, I'm 37 years old and I am not too old for a timeout.
Yeah. Another question that we have, more based around the web development side, is do you use any website building tools for your websites? And if so, which ones?
I do. So the answer is I built my own. I've been using it for 20 years, 15 years. The reason that is, so I graduated from high school. So the timeline's important here. Graduated from high school in the year 2000. Graduated computer engineering in 2005. I had started building websites in 2002, 2003, middle of universities when I really started building a lot of websites. For the record, I've never taken any official courses on web development. That was all self-learned. I have a large programming background, but not a web development educational background. At the time I started building websites, most frameworks weren't very good. WordPress was just really mediocre blogging software. It was meant for blogging. That's all it did was blogging. It was 1.0. A lot of the platforms like Drupal were barely around. Joomla was clunky. They're all clunky. It was all really bad software. And most of it was still, handwritten, not just HTML alone, but you were using a server-side software like PHP or C# or Rails or something. And I built all my stuff in PHP. It was open source. And I had built my own tools for building and managing databases. And most of the stuff I didn't find it that hard. I'm like, okay, well, we'll just build a tool to do this. Fast forward 15 years later, we have continued to develop and expand that platform. Speaking of like, hey, why don't you go big? I could have certainly taken this software and try to push it into like an open source platform and gain notoriety and have millions and millions of users. I get nothing out of that. I had no reason to add that headache to my life. Every developer that used it said it's their favorite platform to use. That's a little braggy. I'm sorry. I'm quite proud of it. 15 years of continual development and expanding on it. It's called Tungsten. It's entirely internal. It's open source, but you have to. It's meant for programmers. You build your own interfaces. You build your own modules for managing data, and it has all the infrastructure to build a website. We've built bilingual registration systems on it, and but there's not a slew of plugins to use. We build what you need, because our business is built to order. We will sit down with you, we'll go through the process, we will identify all your needs, we'll build systems specific to your needs. We are not going to say you have to use, solution XYZ, whatever payment processor you use. You're going to use PayPal, you're going to Square, I don't care. We'll look up the tools, we'll build it, we'll ship it. And so ours is designed around flexibility and being a programmer, and you build it. Now, if you're asking if you're looking into web development, I think that's the truth of the question, right? It's like, hey, what should I go learn? And the question is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. If you do not know core technologies, you are a problem. Because to my company, you'd be a problem. Because you're using the tools that help you skip a step, okay? I don't want someone who knows the latest, which for me personally, because your knowledge of WordPress or whatever else or Node or any technology you use, while relevant and great, isn't immediately applicable to me. You don't know what company's hiring at. From your perspective, you're in grades 9 and 10, so you couple more years of high school plus 3-5 years maybe of university, if that's the path you go. I have no idea what technological platforms will be running the internet in 8 years. Anyone who does is a liar, right? I promise you, it'll change. They might still be the same, but you don't want to hedge your bets on that. But no matter how complicated a website is, no matter who it is, fundamentally, websites send information via HTML, they style them with style sheets, and they use interactivity with JavaScript. That will not change because it hasn't changed since 1990. That is CSS and JavaScript in 93. But those core technologies are fundamentally how the browsers are built on. The entire web runs on those core technologies. Those will not change. If you learn those and you understand them and you appreciate why they're there and why they're each wonderfully unique and accessible and functional and clean and fast, and then you go learn a platform that uses those, you'll understand that platform better. You'll have a baseline that makes sense. You'll be able to adapt to whatever's coming at you. And you'll be a better programmer because you'll debug things faster. Because you're not going to be like, oh, what's this? Oh, I don't know what CSS does. I just use JavaScript. That's great. You're useless to me. Like, if you don't know at the core what it's doing, you have a problem. That same mentality is what led me to build my own CMS, because I understood the core issues. I didn't wait and use some system that sort of like hid the database from me. I understand. I read books. I have a whole book on my shelf about like MySQL database tuning and data structures. I read the whole book. Why? Because I had to build databases. So I read the book on databases. It's heavy. I use a reference. I don't memorize it all, but I have the reference and I've learned it at some point. So learning the basics is what technological stack I would recommend. Now that's for web development. If you're going to go into like app development, then it's, it gets a bit more complicated. I can't speak to that so much. If you're the kind of person who wants to learn like more of the hardware stuff, if you're like, I really want to play with Arduinos or Raspberry Pis or whatever, great. Find out what's used at the core of those and what are those options. Make sure you learn those, right? So learn programming languages, don't learn frameworks, don't learn platforms, learn programming languages.
You've just validated the web development course that they're going to be taking next year that I've designed. So I really appreciate that. So another question that we have is, do you take a day or two off every week for yourself?
Yeah, they're called weekends. They're pretty handy. Not sure you heard of them. No, so do I take days off? Yeah, I take days off when it's necessary, right? So if I give the impression that I'm working 24/7, 7 days a week, that is not it. I enjoy my weekends. Now, also, I enjoy my job. I actually really, like, I will get into a really fun problem and I'll be working on it. So for example, right now, we're building the airport's new website, right? It's a bilingual, data-driven, tying into flights, tying into like all this cool information. It's a content-heavy website, lots of design work, really fun, enjoyable project, fantastic clients, really great to work with. So sometimes stuff comes up and I got to work on something or something's on my brain. And so if it's a Saturday and I'm going to go work for a couple hours, if I'm going to spend time with my wife, I spend time with my wife or my friends or whoever. But if I want to get something done, then I'll go do it. And I don't feel bad about it. It doesn't feel like punishment. Now, there are times when I need to do stuff on the weekend. A lot of times website launches actually happen on weekends. They don't happen on Fridays. They oftentimes happen on a Sunday for a Monday, right? In that case, I schedule that time, but it's fine. It's a trade-off. I might take off some more time during the work week, or sometimes I have crazy work weeks. I've had weeks where I put in 60-hour weeks, but that's not sustainable. And big end of a project, big crunch, stuff we got to get done. Yeah, I'll have some of those weeks, and those aren't fun, but that's also not the norm. And when that's done, I will say like, hey, I'm taking a day off. And my business partner is like, please do that because you're grumpy. So it's about finding a balance, yeah. If we still have a few minutes, I want to talk a little bit about communication.
Yeah, sure. That sounds great.
So as programmers, we're going to talk about quite a few cliches for the next few minutes. So there's a lot of cliches about programming. I'm literally in my basement right now, right? So some cliches are just true. I happen to be someone who is good at communicating. I can take a programming problem and explain it to others. So there are a few things that I've learned being a communicator who's a programmer. I'm an odd duck. And the importance of communicating. And so I'm going to talk a bit about those. The first thing is communication is a two-way street. Communicating is not talking. Communicating is having a conversation, which means you need to listen. Most programmers, young programmers who are working on a problem, particularly those who are trying to impress someone, really try to tell people what answers they have when they really should be asking questions about what problem they're trying to solve. Remember that fundamentally, whatever field you go into, you're a problem solver, and you can't solve a problem unless you listen to what the problem is. So you ask questions. You don't tell people answers. You ask questions. If you are going to give an answer and you're communicating it, you don't use lingo, okay? If you're a programmer, like if you're talking to a client, if you're talking to a coworker, if you're talking to other developers even, don't assume they speak your language, right? And not English, French, whatever. I mean, like programming language, level of technology understanding, amount of acronyms you use, okay? I have been trying very hard, if you noticed throughout this entire conversation, to only use acronyms that I assume you've probably heard of before. I don't need to use a bunch of acronyms. I promise you, I can talk right over your heads if I really wanted to. That's not communicating. That's being a jerk, okay? So communicating is about being able to explain complicated things in a way that everyone understands. And you're not dumbing it down. You're not talking down to someone. You're not doing those things. You're actually just effectively explaining your skill set. And I would say the other half is true. If you can't take what you do and what you're working on and explain it to someone who doesn't understand it, then you don't understand it either, because that is a proof that you can explain it. And the example I use is a friend of mine used to work at a company here in the city, and he was doing hiring, and they were hiring a developer. And so they did an interview. This one person's classic example of like resume was beautiful, right? This, all the skills and looked like a dream candidate. Fantastic. So they got in the interview, and this person had built this weird website that all this crazy stuff. It was like a wild website. Impressive. Like for their age and skill set, impressive. So he's sitting there talking to them, and he's like, so, what, this looks amazing, super cool. Oh, why'd you build it? Like, it was kind of a weird thing. So like, why'd you build it? And the developer looked at him and kind of paused for a second, and then started jumping into like, well, this platform and da da da. And he kind of, he's like, well, no, I understand. No, I understand how it's built. Great. I need you to tell me, like, I'm asking though, like, well, like, why? What was the incentive? Like, what problem were you solving? Like, what made you think of this? And he essentially just like, tell me the story. Like, I'm really intrigued. Tell me the story. And twice more, twice more. And the person was not able to have a human conversation about something technical that they did in a way that was just of equal. And by the way, my friend has a computer engineering degree as well. Really smart guy. He was able to keep up. He understood what the guy was saying, but it wasn't the message he was trying to receive. He was trying to get an understanding of why this person did it and what their purpose was and how they got there. And that interviewee could only ever talk about the technical side. And he walked away. He's like, can't hire him. Nope. Does not communicate. Does not explain it. His brain works in code, lives in code. That's great. But as an employee, how to interact with him? How does he speak to designers? How does he speak to managers? How we would take criticism, right? Most people who have that sort of really guttural, like, I made it, get really defensive. And I promise you, for the first however many years of your life, your code and your work will get torn apart. And if you can't take that, whatever world you go into, that's a problem, right? Your skill set isn't there yet, and that's fine. So yeah, he was at least, I'm sure he got a job somewhere, and I'm sure someone's making great use of his amazing talents. But for what that company needed, they need someone who can not only do the work, but explain the work. And so communicating is super critical. And the way you communicate to other developers oftentimes is through your comments.
So I have one question here. What would you suggest taking in university? What languages? And I know the University of Manitoba goes through a number of different languages as a former University of Manitoba CS student. I know they go through a number of different languages. So what do you suggest taking in university?
Yeah, that's one of those questions that I am not qualified to answer, and I'm not trying to be aloof about it. So if you want to be a programmer, you should take a computer science degree, right? And what ends up happening is, like, if that's where you want to go, that's where you land. At that point, the specific languages you learned are sort of dictated for you, right? You might have a different effect depending where you go to U of W, U of M. There's a bunch of technical colleges that are, a bit quicker, that give you a baseline, all of which are valid options, none of which replace the ability to self-learn. So it's not about programming languages, right? It's not about I should learn this language, right? It's about I want to do XYZ. I find this thing interesting, right? If you find web development interesting, then once you find that topic interesting, then you can go learn languages. And then that's where the message coming from both Scott and I is like, you would then go first learn HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Learn the cores. Okay, great. That's the baseline. That's where it starts. If you want to do something with more hardware based, then you'd go learn those languages because that's what you want to get at. Now, if you're talking about what kind of degree you want to go into, I'll give an explanation. I'll explain the difference between, from my experience, computer science, computer engineering. So, computer science is under the department, the Faculty of Science, and it is very much focused on becoming a programmer and being in that world. It is very focused. It's very good. And if you want to be a programmer, it's where you should go. The benefit of that is it's much more focused, and the baseline is much more focused around programming. I would say upon graduating, students who graduate from computer science for computer engineering know more than computer engineers do. Okay, there's a trade-off, right? When I went to computer engineering, I took a lot of programming courses. Don't get me wrong, but my baseline is different, right? The sort of the area where it's coming from is slightly different, and this is not saying one is better than the other. They're just different, right? In the engineering faculty, there's a strong push towards like liability, like owning your work, understanding that if you mess up, people die. That's a real thing. The baseline of courses you take are slightly different. I can't speak to computer science or what a current computer engineering student would take. But in my first year, I took courses on civil engineering. I took a course on electronics. I took multiple courses on circuits, how fields work, all these other things that are engineering core topics, right? So my core baseline was engineering based. Quite a bit of my computer science learning was not, my computer engineering learning was not necessarily computer science related. A lot of it was hardware. I took multiple courses on hardware programming, on core programming. So the kinds of things you learn in those programs are better and are different. And it's not that one is better than the other. They're just very different. Had I chosen again, I probably should have gone to computer science, but I loved the focus on in that engineering for me had on making sure that you do your work seriously, that if you mess up, people hurt. That's not something to be toyed with, right? And I think that's an important lesson that every computer scientist should know, is like, just because it's easy to do doesn't mean you should do it. There's endless real world examples of that happening in life right now. And so that's sort of one of the key differences if you're talking about those two. If neither of those sound interesting, then you're definitely considering where you want to go in your careers other than that. A good example I'll give. So I was taking second year electronics with a fantastic instructor, Dr. Card, kind of an older guy, sort of like pretty chill in the classroom, but now and then he'd make a good point. And great example of everyone always wants part marks, right? It's like, oh, I got part marks. And so we gave a pop quiz, had one question on it. It was math heavy, right? That's I think I'd probably say is I took way more, engineering students take way more math courses than computer science students do. I took 7 courses, including one that was entirely complex analysis with imaginary numbers. Like, I took a lot of math courses. So we're doing this second year electronics course, and it's like a pretty complicated electronics problem wrapped in a math problem, wrapped in a trick question, all in one. And you get to the end and you're solving this thing, and it was quite easy to mess up, and a bunch of students were off by decimal place. And you think, oh, off by decimal place. And if you did, and it was like 1.2 amps, right? Was what 0.12 amps was the answer. And if you did not get 0.12 amps, you got 0 marks in the entire assignment. And a bunch of students got really upset, and they were like raising their hand. They're like, what? And they're so used to part marks. And I remember this, Dr. Card very calmly says, listen, I know you all want part marks. I know you think you got close. You got 1.2 amps or 0.12 amps. What's the big deal, right? Well, let me tell you, if you put 0.12 amps across someone's heart, it's a mild shock, they'll be okay. If you put 1.2 amps across someone's heart, they die. So let me tell you, you're not getting part marks. You just killed someone. Don't talk to me. And that was the lesson, and it really stuck because it's true. That's the kind of things that I remember from engineering. That's one of those my favorite moments.
Yeah, that's a great story. Last question that I can see here is, would you suggest getting an IT job straight out of high school?
I would say any experience is a good experience, and the earlier you get it, the earlier you'll filter out whether or not you want to do something. So are you saying, is the question like as opposed to going to university? Or is it like getting a summer job?
So a summer job.
Yeah, I would say if you can get it, yeah. Realistically, a recent high school grad getting an IT job, I don't know what kind of work you'd be doing. It's good to be exposed to it. It's good to see it. But it doesn't necessarily have to be an IT job, right? I would say you're better off finding a job in an industry you find interesting so you can learn about it, right? There's value in being exposed to things that are not directly related, right? You don't have to. The educational choices you're going to make are going to narrow your focus already, right? You're already in a dedicated tech program. You are going to be doing a whole bunch of things where you're going to be guided to do things on the tech side. You're probably going to go into a department and a faculty that's going to be tech focused. You have a lot of it already. And yes, you should get jobs that are going to support you and be helpful, but also early on is when you can get jobs that are in the area you think you might be interested in. So I would say, rather than, oh, should I go get a job that lets me like improve my technical skills? I'm sorry to say, whatever your technical skills are out of high school, they're likely not the greatest for the level that a serious company would want. Sorry, it's true. And that's fine, right? That's the whole point of having experience. That's why higher education exists. But there is great value in saying, you know what? I really think I'd like to work at company XYZ. You know, let's say that you want to work for a bigger company that does crazy things that, you know, on the cutting edge. Let's say, let's use a local example, Skip the Dishes, right? You're like, man, I think it would be really cool to be a programmer at Skip the Dishes. Well, I'm sorry to say, they probably aren't hiring programmers directly out of high school, but they might hire people all kinds of areas that are maybe not directly what you'd want to be doing, but in the company, right? And if you come from the program you're doing, which is fantastic, and you reach out to me like, I think I want to work for your company one day, I'd like to see how a company like that runs. Then that's what you would seek out, right? Because then you'll know early on. The earlier you find this stuff out there, is like, no, you know what? It sounds really cool. It's a giant space with a bunch of cubicles and programmers with headphones. Every big tech company pretty much looks like that. Right now, they're all doing that from home, but they all kind of look that way. And that's not a knock against them. It's just the reality of having a bunch of programmers in one space. They're all being respectful and wearing headphones. And so you might think, oh, I don't want to do that. I want to work in more collaborative environment. I want to work for like an agency like mine or like any number of them in the city, right? In which case, getting a job that would be like, oh, it's really creative and they're communicating about stuff. Then you might think, oh, I much more want to be creative side, or, you know, actually, I'd really enjoy like the management side of it, or, you know, you don't know what you like. And so the importance of summer jobs is to give you a glimpse. University co-ops are the same way. We're going to put you somewhere for a limited time. You're going to contribute something. They're going to give you money in exchange, and they're going to get some labor out of you, and you're going to test drive something. Those short-term limits are test drives. So test drive things you think you would like. Whether it's in IT or not, or whether or not you're doing IT is, to me, secondary. It is your chance to test the waters, and that's what I think they should be for.
All right, I think we're going to wrap it up here. We're nearing 2:30, but thank you so much, Paulo, for joining us. This has been incredible. I cannot wait. I want you to like get a TED Talk or something. Like I could listen to you for hours. And I have to say, your point on communication was awesome, because I was just thinking, like, you know, I'm not a tech savvy person myself, but I feel like your information has been so accessible. So thank you so much. And I hope that everyone stays healthy and safe.
Awesome. Thanks, Paulo.